webpage. All right, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We usually do these in the morning. Welcome to MassDEP's Municipal Recycling Coordinators meeting. Today, we'll be discussing the establishment of a permanent household hazardous waste collection facility. I'm Gail Sawerda-Garin, MassDEP Municipal Assistance Coordinator for Northeast District 2. I'm joined by my colleagues, Julia Green, MAC for Northeast District 3, and Missy Hollenbach, MAC for Southeast District 2. It'd help if I was sharing my slides. There we go. Wanted to give you an overview of our agenda. First, David Nightingale, Certified Hazardous Materials Manager and Principal at Special Waste Associates, based out of Olympia, Washington, will share his extensive experience with developing efficient and cost-effective solutions for managing and processing household hazardous waste. Next, MassDEP's James Patterson will discuss permanent household hazardous waste facility regulations and permitting requirements. And Will Mba will discuss state contract FAC 110 for household hazardous waste. Then we'll hear about local permanent household hazardous waste facilities. Tessa David, the director at MassTOS and the Devens Regional Household Hazardous Products Collection Center, will discuss the regional model, and Juanita Trabert, Sustainable Materials Management Director for the City of Newton, will discuss the municipal model. Finally, Janine Bishop of MassDEP will share upcoming grant opportunities to assist your municipality in the establishment of a permanent household hazardous waste facility in your municipality or at a regional effort. We'll have time for questions between various speakers. Please enter your questions into the chat or raise your hand during the question and answer periods. All right, now I'll send it over to Dave to start us off. Looks good, Dave. Just make sure you unmute.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to have a little discussion with you folks about permanent collection facilities. As it was said, it's David Nightingale is my name, and I'm a principal at Special Waste Associates out here in Olympia, Washington, almost in the Pacific Ocean here, a long ways, but I visited Massachusetts a number of times on various occasions. I've helped dozens of communities across the country since 1987 in planning and developing HHW collection programs, and in that process over decades, seen over 155 of these kind of facilities in various states and provinces. I'm also a NAMA board member. Those of you who may not be familiar with NAMA, we've got a local Northeast chapter there, and it stands for the North American Hazardous Materials Management Association. And these folks are sort of like, you might think of them as a SWANA light, but focused just on HHW and very small quantity generator waste and management, extended producer responsibility. Those are kind of the things that they focus on. I'm on the board, actually returning. I've been on the board a while ago, and now I'm back on the board again. And things I've written include HHW facility design guide, as well as more recently a chronicle of the HHW corner. Those of you who read or get Waste Advantage magazine may have seen that column ran from two and a half years between January 2020 and June of 2022. So I've compiled all that into a book form. Also, you may know some of your local luminaries here, Scott Cassell with Product Stewardship Institute, and Amy Cabanis, who has a long history with HHW.
This guy is speaking from Olympia, Washington.
Yes, that's correct. Am I coming through all right? Okay, great, thank you. And also been co-author with Amy Cabanis and Scott Cassell on the HHW handbook, which is I'd say it's kind of a baseline reference. If you're new to the field, it's a good book to have. Currently, I'm working for Barnstable County, which is Cape Cod. They're seeking to develop a permanent facility, and I'll touch on that a little bit more later in the presentation. Calliope Shute is who I'm working with there. I'm sure a lot of you know her. But, from talking to her and also to the MassDEP people, that there seems to be, the local interest in the things in the introductory as far as, encouraging local jurisdictions to find, either single or multiple regional solutions to HHW collection. So that was the impetus, I think, behind having me talk to you guys today. So I'll provide kind of a national perspective, primarily about household hazardous waste development, and be happy to take questions at the end. Sort of an overview, I'll be talking about, so how do you know if you're being effective, in a broad scheme? And there's a rubric that I've developed that doesn't depend on how big a population. You can compare this metric between local jurisdictions, between states, between countries, I guess you could. I don't think anybody's ever done that. Also talk about, effectiveness relative to events versus permanent facilities. What do people see typically as far as the effectiveness there? And then a little more granularly, what happens at the urban level versus a suburban and a rural context? What kind of results do you see, and are they changed much between those kinds of populations? And then near the end, I'll talk about, well, at what point do I have maybe a critical mass of population that can actually sustain and build a facility for a local jurisdiction? And then just touch on, probably some of you already know, but those of you who don't, some of the advantages and benefits when you do have an HHW facility or a program to collect it. So one of the questions often people have is, so, I'm doing collection events, isn't that good enough? If not, how many do I need to do? So there's increasingly challenges with doing collection events, even if you've done them for a long time, with just demand for them. There's limited contractors. If you're doing collection events, unless you're doing them like every week, there's times when the customers really need, somebody's moving, there's a death in the family, they have to clean out the house, there's a sale, and doing collection events typically doesn't serve people in all times of year when they need it. And so those things end up being disposed of, less properly, I would say. Also, with collection events, it's a big, kind of a big cluster with lots going on, and there's not as much time available because you're got to move the people through. You don't want them backed up onto the highway, and so efficiency suffers, and also your cost control is not able to be implemented as you might at a year-round facility, sort of thing, comparatively. So also, reuse is a big deal, and there's programs out there that are 10-20% of what they bring in. They are in good enough condition, safe stuff, not banned pesticides or anything, and they send them right back out to the community to be used. And with a collection event, really, because it's so hectic and so much going on, that really is a lost opportunity to do reuse. Also, contractor availability, sort of touched on that a little bit, and the prices seem to be going up. For a while they were going down, not so much now. And then just overall, the logistics and everything, you can't design it to be as efficient as a permanent facility generally. So now turning to that question I mentioned about effectiveness. So paint, oil-based and latex-based paints are typically about half, 40 to 60% normally, of all the HHW collect is going to be some kind of paint, varnish, finish of some sort, typically for architectural use. So that's just sort of setting this up about how are we going to get to effectiveness. And interestingly, because of the many, a couple decades ago, the Clean Air Act required manufacturers of paint to actually date every container that they make. There's a code on it, and if you get the decoder key, you can actually find out when that was made, and so you can date how old this paint is that you're receiving into your facility. So I led a study and found, we went through hundreds and hundreds of cans of paint, got the codes and decoded it, and found the average age of all these paints, which is about half of all the HHW, about 7.4 years ended up being the average age of them. So now if you can, suspend disbelief and say, okay, comes in every 7.4 years. That's representative of at least half HHW. Maybe the other half of the HHW also is around that same age. If you can take that assumption and go with it, then we can do something and kind of do an effective in the calculation. So that would be essentially unlike, recyclables where you're looking at, set out rates per week, pounds per set out, that sort of stuff. The periodicity of HHW is much, much longer than that. So we're talking about the periodicity of the average generation being every 7.4 years. And assuming that represents the rest of HHW, then you can actually calculate, how to serve all your households. If they're only coming in only 7.4 years, if you serve 13.5% of the households per year, over the 7.4 years, you'll get all your households on average. So that is the key thing, that an effectiveness then, if you want to be fully effective, you want to serve somewhere in that range of 13.5% of households per year. So if you look at that another way, talking about it, so 13.5%, you could call that 100% collection effectiveness for HHW. All right, so just some examples. So you take your households served per year, most people collect that information, multiply it by 7.4 a year because that's the generation periodicity. And then that gives you that percent of effectiveness that I show below. So if you're serving 3% of your households per year, then using this formula, you'd say you may be serving around 22% of collection effectiveness on an annual basis for that year. Another year, you're doing 12%, you're doing 89% collection effectiveness. So just some examples of how that works. I'll provide a minute. One of the things that it's really simple to calculate. Pretty much everybody counts how many customers they do. So it's not an exotic something you have to derive. You've already got that data in most programs. It's transparent. It's pretty obvious. It's objective. It's not subjective as far as other than making that assumption that that is the correct number. It's a very simple and objective thing. And also for decision makers, if they, you say, we've been, 86% effective last year, we're going to try to get to 100%. Decision makers understand that it's an easy enough metric. And as I said, you can compare this over time, year to year, but you can also compare between different size jurisdictions because there's nothing in this formula that requires you to normalize it to the size of the population you serve. So the smallest population, you can have an effectiveness number, and you can compare that with a large population base. All right, so now let's talk about collection events and facilities in another way. Regarding the effectiveness, so if we're events typically serve 1 to 5%. That's a pretty average number of households per year. So that's not a very high effectiveness. If you multiplied that by 7.4, that's not very, very effective. Permanent facilities can and have met the 13.5 annual service level, which is that 100% effectiveness, and gone above it as well. It's just an average, and things you can exceed 100% in this case. Here's an example from a suburban rural county, and it's a suburb south of Colorado, Denver, the biggest city, but also has a lot of rural area also, but pushing through 400,000 people. They did their first collection event in 1993, had 142 participants and a little over, a couple of tons of HHW. And so they've also, since then they've kept doing in multiple collection events, usually 3 a year in various locations around the county. And the last decade, this is what it's looked like, at least through 2016. I haven't got more recent data. But this, you can see it's up and down over the year. And it's 1.6 to 2.2%, which would translate into 12 to 16% effectiveness. So this is not unusual. This is the kind of statistics I see all around the country as far as jurisdictions that just rely on collection events only. This is not an unusual picture. Now, looking at a permanent facility, here's an example a little bit closer to you. This is up in Burlington, Vermont, Chittenden County specifically. And you can see how, again, this is a long-term look. Back in '92, they established their permanent facility, and they found 7% of the people came in as soon as they did a permanent facility, and then that trended up over, and after they were 6 or 7 years in, they got to that 100% collection effectiveness threshold I've been talking about. And you see, it's kind of bounced around, and they're a little bit above that. which means probably people are coming in a little bit more frequently, maybe than 7.4, because people know about it more and that sort of stuff. But you can see that it kind of plateaus. It's growing a little bit, but the dramatic thing going from 0 up to this threshold is possible. Not every jurisdiction you'll see this, but it's a good, really long-term picture of a Northeast jurisdiction with 171,000 population. Here's some other examples I compiled a few years ago, and down here, Thousand Oaks, California, at 72% effectiveness, all the way up to Hennepin County, Minnesota, which is an impressively large amount of households per year. But there's a lot that are in this, approximately 100%, that they've achieved that. There's also, I think, Addison County, Vermont would be on this list, and others, I'm sure. I mean, this is not a comprehensive list, just one I was able to put together a couple years ago, trying to demonstrate that this is a possible outcome. And then looking at, in this chart here, you've got the percent of households per year. So 13.5% would be around here, but I've broken it out by population density. So this is people per square mile. And as you go to the right on this chart, you get smaller and smaller density population. So lesser dense population on the right-hand side and more dense. And so in this case, you can see that, these are all permanent facilities. They typically tend to be up, 3 to 5% is not unusual, but there's a lot above 5%, which normally you don't see with collection events. But you don't see a lot of trend. There's a lot that are above 5% and even 10%. And the one thing I guess I would take away from this is that, so for suburban, you've got 4 up above 5% and 3 down here in the lower level. Rural, you've got 4 above, the 5% and 4 down here. In urban, above 5%, you've only got 2, and you've got 6 below here. And this is what I've seen. The only thing I can take away, or actually 3, there's a one up here very high. From this is that an urban area, it's more difficult to get higher levels of participation. I think there's just a lot competing in the advertisement space. It may be more difficult to get from one side of the town to the other if you don't have a lot of places to take it. So I think urban landscape is actually more difficult to get higher participation levels than rural and suburban in general. So this is not conclusive. This isn't hundreds of data points, but it's suggestive and it reflects what my experience has been as well. Now here's an interesting example of, and this is with Sonoma County, which is just north of San Francisco. And they did collection events, and these were dozens of collection events per year all over the county for many years, from 97 to 2004. And then in 2005, they opened a permanent facility, but they continued to do collection events. Not quite as many, but quite a few still. But you can see the dramatic drop from the dark bars down as soon as the permanent facility came in, the light gray. That's what people use. So there's a clear preference. And I've seen this in other jurisdictions also, where once you establish a permanent facility, even if you do collection events continuing, they just get overwhelmed by the popularity of doing the permanent year-round facilities. So that takes care of that. So then, a logical question is, well, how big a population does it take to support, a permanent facility? And so I showed you, the urban, suburban, rural, levels, and it's a little bit different if you've got a small township of a couple hundred people. Probably you don't have the resources available. If you're a Boston, probably you have the resources, but you just need the will and the interest and champion to do that. So here's some historic service levels. And this was done quite a while ago, but it's still reflective of what I see around the country. So here, this is just a list of, these are facilities that I was able to do. I did a national survey of facilities that had been operating at least 6 years by 1996. So that means 1990 to 1995. They would have been operating all those years. So this is fairly early, but you can see that, interestingly, under 100,000 population, there's quite a few facilities. So, it's 85,000, 63,000, 24, 41, 33, quite a few service area populations that are under 100,000 people that have permanent facilities and been operating for years at that point in time. Also, if you look at the orange bars, these are populations with over 1 million people in their service territory, and all of them have multiple facilities to serve their population. And so based on, different service level needs, there's a kind of a range here of the average number of population per facility. So in here, the range is between 24,000 people per facility to 724,000 people per facility, if you look at this whole table here. So San Francisco being 724,000, highly densely populated, probably got some similarities as far as population density to Boston. Very difficult to site a facility. And that's the top one here. They only have one facility, and they still only have one facility. They have a lot of other programs, curbside collection and other stuff to fill in the gaps. But as far as facilities go, they've only got one. But most of them are much lower than that. It's 300,000, 400,000, and quite a bit less, down to these blue ones where it's tens of thousands. So anyway, just an idea about, what the history tells us. Now, looking more currently, I did an analysis a year or so ago, looking at my state of Washington, what's going on here. And you can see most counties in light gray have facilities, been operating for many years. The dark gray are counties where they're in the process of developing additional facilities. So King County, where Seattle is, they're actually going to be under construction later this year for a 4th facility. Benton County is going to have a facility very soon. And these other counties, they're all tend to be on the smaller side. And let me show you exactly, the breakdown. So of those facility counties, less than 50,000, there's 18 counties in that category. 6 of them do not have any permanent facility. But if you look at the population of those 6, there's only one that's over 20,000 people of the total 18 that don't have a facility. So that's an interesting, sort of a cutoff here around 20,000 that may be a lower threshold of being able to support a facility. Now looking at the next largest set of counties, 50 to 99,000, there's 9 counties of that size in Washington State. They all have facilities. 100,000 or more, those kind of counties, population-wise, there's a dozen of them. There's only 2 that don't have permanent facilities. And this one here is Benton County, and they're almost ready to put up a facility. So out of these dozen counties over 100,000, there are only, in the near term, there's only going to be 1 over 100,000 and barely over 100,000 that doesn't have a permanent facility. And this is very different than, say, 20 years ago, where most counties did collection events in Washington. Very few counties 20 years ago had a facility. So there's been a slow progression over time. And this is a large part because Department of Ecology has consistently provided significant grant opportunities in the $100,000 plus per county statewide for a long time. And a lot of that's used for HHW programs. So, it's an evolutionary process, but it's just an example of at least the state I'm very familiar with. So
I just wanted to give you a 5-minute warning.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thinking about the first tranche of smaller populations, 20,000, I would say if you have support from some kind of financial partnership that's a long-term one with the state or with a wastewater treatment plant, solid waste tipping fees, that you might be able to get, 20,000 population or more. I'd say that's a minimum threshold that you have to even think about it when you have financial partnership. And you may have to do it, in a way where you have to kind of work up to it. Maybe first you do some research, then you buy the land, and then you do the design, and then the next year you actually break ground. And the phased-in approach, oftentimes when you have a smaller jurisdiction, you do it over time. So if you don't have any kind of financial partner and you're just doing it on, internal resources within the county government, maybe 50 to 1,000, 100,000 might be a reasonable threshold to think about a minimum size to be able to support and build a facility. So anyway, critical mass 50 to 100,000. And so if you don't have that within your jurisdiction, you probably want to partner with somebody and do a regional system like what has been talked about at the top of the day today. And, you know, do a partnership where you're doing multiple jurisdictions to do a regional facility to support you. And then thinking about urban and rural, as I sort of talked about a little bit, and I'm suggesting that, you know, anywhere between 100 to 250,000 would maybe the top end of what you'd want per facility as far as the maximum amount of population served per facility. So if you've got 1 million people in your jurisdiction, you probably want to think about, you know, 4 or more facilities to adequately serve your residents. So sort of a recap here, year-round facilities are long-term commitment, but they're a very positive resource. They provide a high level of collection effectiveness compared to events, and you can control costs and reduce cost per participant compared to an HHW collection event. Here's just some pictures, and you won't, so if you're familiar with the Newton facility and other ones around most of New England, they don't look like this, but this is what other people around the country, when they build permanent facilities, they're thinking of pretty substantial facilities. And all of these facilities, these are all 10 to 15 to 20 years old. So these aren't even new. These have been around a while. Here's some other states: Washington, Florida, Idaho, California. Again, all these facilities are at least a decade old. The Idaho facility, probably 25 years old. Okay, so in just a little quick rundown, if you're not already familiar of why would you do this, what's the benefits? So you protect the people in the home, the children and the adults, from chemicals that they could get exposed to that they wouldn't have to if they got rid of the materials that they don't need anymore. Firefighters responding to residential fires, you put them at higher risk the more of these chemicals you have, because they volatilize and become a hazard during an emergency fire. Also, the infrastructure for solid waste facilities, and probably the poster child today is lithium-ion battery fires. But that's the kind of thing that HHW facilities take. There's been propane tanks blowing up and ruining equipment. There's all kinds of stuff that's taken in HHW facilities that reduce the risk and the threat to the infrastructure solid waste system. And also there's stormwater positive impacts, groundwater resource contamination, non-point sources that you can partner with, and is part of the advantages and the benefits of these, as well as wastewater treatment. Biosolids quality is increasingly getting to be an issue for people doing wastewater treatment, as well as discharge limits to whatever body of water that the wastewater is going to. Not everything is treated, especially synthetic chemicals that are often contained in the HHW group. And then just for very brief here about what Cape Cod is happening with Barnstable County. I don't know if Calliope is on here or not, but they are planning to upgrade 2 existing small collection events, collection centers, to be a little bit more capable and have a larger capacity. And then next, they want to build a larger main collection facility, kind of as a hub for these collection center spokes to be the coordinating later on in the Cape. And that is about it, except that how do you go forward? You need a champion. Like Calliope, for instance, is a champion in her area. You'll hear about other people later in their experiences, but you need a local champion to get things going. You have to have a commitment to increase your service by, somebody in a position of authority, probably, or a board. Establish your goals and create a sustainable funding model. And I recommend for planning purposes that you think about having a facility that can easily manage 10% or more annual participation by your households. And that should do it for me, except for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, David.
Uh-huh.
All right. Are there any questions in the chat?
None in the chats.
Okay. All right. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand. And Gunther, yes, we will have a recording and the presentations available after this. Claire, go ahead.
Hi, we're talking about possibly building one on the South Shore too. And my question is, shoot, what is my question? Oh boy, I hate when that happens. Oh yeah, when you talk about a permanent facility, are you talking about one that is open occasionally or like throughout the week? We're thinking once a month for ours. So what is the usual model there, David?
That's a great question. There isn't any definition for that, but there was an organization actually that existed for quite a while in Andover, Massachusetts, and they used to define a permanent facility or permanent collection program as one that is at least monthly. So if you think about monthly, you know, according to that historic definition, that you would be, you know, fitting into that model. But I think, you know, once a month is probably a reasonable minimum if you really want to have year-round service. There's some places in the like in the northern Minnesota where they might actually close down for a few months, and other places in Alaska where the dead of winter, you know, people aren't moving around, and so they may either cut back the number of open days per week or per month, or they might actually even close down for a month or two in the dead of winter. But, you know, monthly average, I think that would definitely qualify. That's enough activity that, you know, a lot of times people, if they're moving or something, you know, ahead of time, they may be able to wait a few weeks to bring something in. Another thing people do oftentimes is they will, you know, on an emergency kind of basis, like, you know, we've sold our house. On an appointment basis, they'll have somebody come in the off hours or the off days to do a one-off sort of thing if need be.
Right, so we have a few questions in the chat, and two I think you might want to answer at the same time. One is from let's see, AP. I'm not sure who that is, but the average cost of a collection facility. And then Brooke Nash is also asking, can you talk about why a large building is needed for a permanent facility? So I would imagine those two overlap.
Okay. Yeah, so let me take Brooke's question first. A large building is, so there's a couple things going on. One is just environmental protection. And if you have just a prefabricated hazmat building that, you know, delivered on a semi truck and just plopped down there, you know, you don't have protection from the rain. And so if you spilled something, unless you put a canopy in there also, you don't have good protection for the soils right there if you spill something. Even if you have asphalt, you know, things can permeate through, some hydrocarbons can permeate through an asphalt. But probably, you know, that's not, I think, a huge deal. It is important. And as far as permitting, you want to actually be protective of the environment. But I think that probably a bigger driver than that, from my perspective, from operations, is that you want to be able to ship off in economic truckload sizes. So in order to get the best deal and also not have it be a rush collection event where it all has to happen at once and you have some flexibility in shipping off, shipping in a full truckload is going to give you the economy of scale. And so you need the space in order to have that much material on hand so you can load it all at once onto the truck. Also, just a matter of processing inside one of those hazardous materials buildings, there's not a very high ceiling in them. And there typically isn't very good ventilation. And on a cost per square foot basis, you're not going to save anything building the same square footage for that kind of activity in a building as you would for those prefabricated buildings where you want to have those flammable liquids, for instance, which is kind of the big deal from the fire code perspective, to be in a contained special part of the building. So, you know, it could be a couple thousand square feet, but it can be, you know, 20,000 square feet too. And it depends also on what you're doing. I mean, it's getting to the other question of how large. If you take e-waste, you need space for that may or may not need to be undercover. But in order to operate when it's freezing outside, to operate when it's 100 degrees outside and high humidity, how do you want to have your employees treated as far as their environment? And the stress on the people also can be significant. So there's also some ergonomic employee issues to do as far as having an enclosed building as opposed to just have it out in the open. So anyway, talked about a number of issues there. The average cost of a collection facility is largely driven by the need for some of these specialized things like the fire suppression equipment and secondary containment and good ventilation. And depending on how big it is, I mean, let's say it's 2,000 square feet, the prices I'm seeing now are in the $500 per square foot range to build a new facility. So you can do the math, 2,000 square feet or 2,500 square feet by $500 per square foot. You know, it's significant if you want to be able to ship off in truckload quantities. And that's for the long term. So it's a significant investment. And I'm talking to one facility in California that they're 80,000 square feet and they think it's too small. I think they've got some efficiencies that they can figure out and I can help them with. But I don't think that's where you would start. You would start with a couple thousand square feet and think about how that goes. But also a way to save the cost. Oftentimes, not always, but a lot of times you can find a building that can be retrofitted. So you're essentially reusing a building for a new purpose. And just retrofitting for the hazardous flammable liquids part, have one small part of the building dedicated to that, and the rest is just kind of a warehouse. So it's not terribly expensive. And that's a way to then control your cost of the facility build. There's lots of other considerations, but just I'm answering those two questions.
And then we're kind of follow up with, other than the obvious weather related reasons, most small HHW permanent location sites in Massachusetts closed down for December to March. Is that kind of something you're also seeing within, like, you know, maybe Minnesota or Washington?
Yeah,
Is that-
I mean, in Minnesota, they tend to limit the hours. They'll cut the hours about in half for 4 or 5 months out of the year during the winter in Minnesota. That's more common. Most of them don't shut down completely. I know in Alaska, and there's a couple other places where they just don't. In fact, interestingly, historically in Boulder, Colorado, when they had a facility that just had, you know, prefabricated buildings scattered around in, you know, shipping containers that they adapted, you know, kind of in a campus area. When it rained, they shut down because it's like, it's just, you know, it's not just set up and it's not good. And we don't even want to operate when it rains or it snows. So in some places it's weather dependent on whether they're going to, I mean, now they have a nice enclosed facility and they're open all the time, but that was how they used to operate when it was open to the air and there wasn't much protection from the weather.
We have time for about another minute of questions.
Okay, I'm gonna have to choose here. Let's see, I will go with Janice's. I assume that more than once a month would work better for more densely populated municipalities, or is once a month okay for all sizes?
If you have a larger population, I say once a month probably isn't going to be adequate. You probably want to be at least weekly, if not more often. Yeah, and also I'll answer Kathy's question here. Suitable.
Yep.
Co-locating, definitely co-locating can be a really great thing. Co-locating with a transfer station, a landfill, a fire department, a wastewater treatment site. Those are all things that have been done successfully, and there's synergies between each of those kind of partners, and also maybe helping with staffing, cross-training, and cost of you know, acquiring a site. For instance, you might get a donation for the site.
And how are we for time, Gail? One more? Or?
Yeah, do one more.
Okay, and let's see, we will go with Susan. So Susan's husband recently cleaned out a family household in rural southern Minnesota and was surprised to learn that they had access to multiple permanent HHW collection center options, to the point where the price comparison would enter the equation. What historical context might explain the wealth of HHW facilities in a rural area? What might we learn from them?
Yeah, in Minnesota, they've got a pretty well coordinated statewide system. And a lot of times there's interlocal agreements that anybody, in the state can use this facility. This happens in Illinois also, where if you're relying on state funding for building your facility, you have to have it open to any Illinois residents. Also within the St. Paul, Minneapolis area, they all work as a coordinated group, even though there's multiple counties. A lot of the counties have multiple facilities, and there's just an agreement that, we'll take our neighboring counties' waste as well as our own county's citizens' waste. So it happens in some areas, not so much in others. California doesn't tend to be that way. They tend to have larger counties too, where you have to go to the facility that your jurisdiction is part of. You can't go to an HH facility in a neighboring county, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dave.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks very much.
Right. We might have some time for more questions at the end. So right now, we're going to have Jim Patterson from MassDEP talk about permanent household hazardous waste facility regulations and permitting requirements. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you. Yep, I'm James Patterson. I'm the branch chief for the hazardous waste program here in Boston. I've been in the same program for 30 plus years. So my shop develops regulations, including these regulations, which go back to I would say, middle 1990s. We're also involved in licensing hazardous waste facilities like the Clean Harbors of the world and Safety Cleans. And we also permit some of the mercury recycling facilities. So let me just get going here. Seem to be frozen. Okay, so as David alluded to, most household hazardous waste collection activity in Massachusetts takes place at the events, not the centers. Many of you are familiar with how the events work, but the concept is that these events are operated by licensed hazardous waste transporters. We have an extensive licensing program for those hazardous waste transporters, and typically the transporters are associated with a facility like Clean Harbors or Triumvirate, and they have expertise on sorting and packaging and all sorts of DOT requirements prior to shipping are sort of their specialty. So the key there is that they come and go on the same day, or maybe if it's a more than one day event, but they come and they go. So your expertise comes in and then your expertise is gone. Centers, on the other hand, as opposed to a one-day event, you're becoming a hazardous waste generator because you have, and therefore you have to comply with accumulation standards and a number of other regulations. So when we developed our household hazardous waste center regulations, what we did was try to strike a balance between not too little, not too much regulation, meaning that just identifying them as something like akin to a very small quantity generator wouldn't be enough. Obviously, applying the full hazardous waste facility requirements would be a non-starter, since there's financial assurance and siting and that sort of those sorts of requirements that aren't obviously a match for this type of activity. So and LQGs are large quantity generators. That's also probably a little too much. So in the end, we picked and chose regulations from the VSQGs, the SQGs, the LQGs, probably nothing from the hazardous waste facility regulations to come up with household hazardous waste center requirements. And as you may know, these centers, they can be run by private or public entities. So 310 CMR 30 is the general CFR reference for the hazardous waste regulations. And within those hazardous waste regulations, you've got 3391 for definitions, and then 30.392, we have the event requirements, and then 393 are the requirements for household hazardous waste centers. There's also somewhat of a lesser known provision there in 30.394 that enables some movement of household hazardous waste to and from events or directly from households for that matter. But I won't be getting into that today. But if you happen upon our regulations, that's something to take a look at. So in terms of general requirements, there's 310 CMR 30.393, 1 through 4. I'll get into the details later. If it's a household hazardous waste center that's managing waste oil, there's 30.393.5. In terms of approvals, if it's a center that collects just waste oil or surplus paint, it's a 21-day presumptive approval. I'll provide you the information about the applications, but once that application is submitted, if it's just for waste oil and surplus paint, if you don't hear back from the department after 21 days, you can presume that you have an approval. Centers that accept hazardous waste other than waste oil and surplus paint must receive a written approval from MassDEP. We have regulations. We also have a form. I think that it's worth noting that the individual or individuals that are reviewing the application may notice something that the regulations don't cover that should be covered. And so as a result, there is a provision in our regulations that as part of the approval, there are other conditions may be part of the approval to ensure that the center activity does not constitute a significant risk. It's not as much of a wild card as it sounds. I don't think that there's anything to be concerned with there, but it does give MassDEP some flexibility to add other requirements if it's deemed necessary. So on our website, you can see the form here for household hazardous waste collection centers. Then there's a separate one for collection centers that just deal in used oil and or surplus paint. It's not required by regulation, but a pre-application meeting with MassDEP would be a good idea. When the applications are submitted, they will go to the regional office where the town is located. So if you need information on who to contact, I can help you with that. But there's also contact information on the applications. And the regulations do specify that a copy of the application should also be submitted to the Board of Health and the fire department of the host town. So management standards, sponsors of the center must obtain an EPA ID number. That's not required under the household hazardous waste event regulations because the transporter typically provides the number. But as a hazardous waste generator, the center must have an EPA ID number. There also need to be individuals at the facility that have knowledge of hazardous waste characteristics, ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, toxicity, and the hazardous waste listings for F-listed and P-listed wastes, et cetera. The sponsors also have to comply with the hazardous waste manifest and pre-transportation packaging requirements. Typically, the transporters help with that, but it's certainly a good idea to have expertise in the facility that can sort of make that process more efficient so that the transporter doesn't have to do that much when they arrive for the hazardous waste pickup. There also has to be a secure main hazardous waste accumulation area. There has to be a hazardous waste sign posted, and then lines demarcating the main accumulation area. So it's sort of your lines, lids, and label requirements that apply to typical hazardous waste generators. Also really important, the facility has to provide adequate containment for containers and tanks. The way that's interpreted in our regulations is that, you know, it doesn't if it's indoors, it doesn't necessarily have to be a berm that contains the waste. But on the other hand, there has to be effective containment provided by the building, which means you don't want to have a situation where there's a tank release or a container release and the contents flow directly to a dock and out of the building or into a drain. You have to ensure that there's adequate containment by the building. If it's outside, we do have berm requirements for containment. You also have to have surfaces that are free of cracks and impermeable. More management standards, accumulation start date on the containers and tanks, pay special attention to managing ignitable, reactive, or incompatible wastes, prepare and follow emergency prevention and response procedures, and comply with the land disposal restrictions, which typically will amount to a one-time land disposal restriction notification form for each waste stream. So it's not every shipment, it's one notification form per waste stream at the facility. And again, the transporters will help with that.
3-minute warning for you, Jim.
Okay. Site requirements. The work area has to be at least 50 feet from all containers and tanks that contain ignitable materials that weren't accepted at the facility. For example, a fuel tank. Impervious surface, so spilled material can be readily collected and removed. Ventilated to ensure adequate controls of hazardous vapors if the work area is indoors. More site requirements. There has to be sufficient space for accumulation and packaging of hazardous waste and for entrance and egress of persons bringing hazardous waste to the center, and emergency response vehicles. At all times, while the center is operational, cover all drains, have no smoking signs posted, no smoking. Emergency cleanup and protective equipment must be readily accessible. Security measures in place where hazardous waste is accumulated. And underground storage tanks for hazardous waste accepted at the center are prohibited. Household hazardous waste centers can accumulate for up to 180 days. There's a little bit of a twist here, which sort of goes in favor of the center. The accumulation period doesn't start until the amount of hazardous waste in the container equals 27 gallons or half a drum. However, if there's any acutely hazardous waste generated, then the accumulation start date starts immediately. Don't accumulate waste for more than 180 days, or you've entered the world of licensed hazardous waste facilities, and that is not a place you want to be. You are not Clean Harbors, nor do you want to be. Operation requirements, there must be an attendant present while the center is open who's trained in sorting procedures for the determination of hazards, classification for reuse and recycling, potential health and safety issues. Any hazardous waste received from a VSQG shall record the shipment on a shipping paper. You can't accept hazardous waste on a manifest. And there's a report due every January 15th on the previous year's activity. Have to retain the services of a licensed transporter to remove the waste. You can sort of, if the facility for some reason has its own hazardous waste, it doesn't have to combine that waste with the waste received at the center. But if they do, they have to reflect that in their hazardous waste generator status calculation. Center shall refuse to accept any waste if there's reason to believe that it's not household hazardous waste or hazardous waste generated by a very small quantity generator. You can't accept it if it's unidentifiable, explosive, or reactive, or cannot be lawfully disposed of, or if it's specified as unacceptable in the contract between the sponsor and the transporter. And that is it. Those are the regulations for household hazardous waste centers in Massachusetts.
Great, thank you so much, Jim. We're gonna hold questions until after our next speaker, so if you have some, feel free to write them in the chat or you can raise your hand later. Next, we're gonna hear from Willem Ba from MassDEP. He's gonna talk about state contract FAC 110 for household hazardous waste. Will,
I was trying to share in Jim's slide.
should be good to go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Am I sharing?
Yes, looks good.
Oh, that's not my first slide. It's frozen.
It might be a little slow. Did you try your back arrow?
Yeah, try your arrows
Oh,
on your,
nice.
yep.
There you go.
Okay, my apologies, bear with me. Yeah, so hello everyone. Thank you, Jim and Dave. I'll be presenting on FAC 110, household hazardous waste collection. So it's really municipalities for this. Oh, it just changed by itself. Did not change this. Anyway, let's just go with the flow. So, but the presentation will focus on household hazardous waste, and municipalities are not required to use state contracts for goods or services. The contracts are created for your benefit, but you are not obligated to use vendors on state contracts. So you can see, these are the major categories under FAC 110. There are also subcategories under these major categories. But we'll be focusing on HHW collection. So before we begin, it'd be nice to know the benefits of FAC 110. Municipalities using FAC 110 do not need to solicit bids for HHW projects. The pricing in the state contract is a ceiling, as a final price, and when you communicate with vendors, let them know you want the FAC 110 pricing, because the state has already done the bidding for you. So somebody asked in the chat about HHW service providers. So these are vendors allowed to collect and transport hazardous waste. But this webinar is about permanent household hazardous waste. As you can see, there are a lot of vendors in category 1. You have ACB Environmental Services, Clean Harbors, New England Disposal Technologies, NRC East Environmental Services, Strategic Environmental Services, TREDB, Trident, and Triumvirate Environmental. Category 2 vendors, also for household hazardous waste. These are vendors allowed to collect and transport household hazardous waste. Of course, feel free to reach out to category 1 vendors to see if they can do HHW events. But if you do, you will have to go out to bid and will have to follow procurement rules. So these are the main vendors for category 2. You have ACV, Clean Earth, Clean Harbors, and Trident Environmental Group. As far as pricing is concerned, this is the most important one. Pricing updates contractually must be published by July 1st for this contract. And the prices are increasing. In fact, we are currently seeing increases averaging about 30%. So the vendors were not allowed to propose price increases over the first 2 years of this contract, which started in 2020. If there are any changes in pricing, a proposal must be submitted in writing to the contract manager in this case, Operational Services Division, which is often called OSD, as the acronym, a minimum of 6 months prior to July 1st, the contract anniversary. Price increase requests must be accompanied by documentation, such as, but not limited to, an identified contractor cost increase. For example, raw materials, freight, fuel, labor, evidence from publications, journals, or market quotations recognized as representatives of the trade or industry that indicate market trends for the contracted service, and copies of old and new price lists, if applicable, reflecting price changes. The strategic sourcing team and OSD are currently reviewing these price increases. So these are, again, with this, if you choose to use vendors in another category, you will need to negotiate directly with these vendors, since they are not contracted with the state for category 2 HHW. So I also provided a link to how you can find a price table and get some information for yourself and educate yourself about how the contract works. And also the last slide is just a list of additional resources, for you to explore. But again, this price table will change once it's published. So that's all I have. And with that.
Great, thank you so much, Will. All right, now we have some time for questions for Jim and Will.
Let's see. So Will answered one of Jerry Cody's questions. The other one he had is, are municipal employees required to have 40 hours of OSHA training to work with HHP, or are municipal employees exempt? And I'm not sure who would be able to answer that.
This is Jim. I'm not aware of that requirement for the household hazardous waste centers. The regulations are for VSQGs and SQGs, they're a little bit general. Basically, the person that signs the manifest has to have familiarity in how to manage hazardous waste. It's more explicit. There is annual training required for large quantity generators, but we don't attach that. We haven't attached that provision to the centers.
David.
Yeah, I can take a little crack at the training requirement. There are some states that require HAZWOPER training, and normally it's not a 40-hour HAZWOPER training. It's more often a 24-hour HAZWOPER training, and that's because the intent for the 40-hour HAZWOPER is for the TSDs, the fully regulated hazardous materials disposal and storage facilities, or a Superfund cleanup site, or an emergency response, a train car fire is going on or something like that. It's not designed, a 40-hour course, for a engineered controlled environment place like an HHW facility. And the 24-hour version of the HAZWOPER is for those kind of facilities where you pretty much know what's coming in the door. You have engineered control of spills. There's ventilation built in. It's designed to manage that waste very safely. And so that is the standard where it exists in some states. Actually, my state doesn't require that either, but it's highly recommended. And just as an aside to that, there's a NAMA/SWANA 24-hour HHW specific HAZWOPER course. It's designed just for meeting that requirement. That's available from NAMA, or sometimes SWANA provides it too, but it's a joint training, and I've been part of that, so that's how I know about it.
So is that an online training, or is it something they would need to travel to?
It's not online at this point. We're we're struggling with that because there really needs to be some hands-on parts of it, but we're hoping to get it into an online version, but I can't make any promises at this point.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, there's also some various SWANA chapters have sponsored it though too. Or you can talk to your NAMA chapter to sponsor it, because they would be knowledgeable about its existence and how to get that set up. But usually you need to have, 5 or 10 people minimum to make it so that, you can pay for the cost.
Thank you.
So we're going to have Norma, if you wouldn't mind speaking, you've had a few questions, and I think others would be interested in that as well. And maybe we could all hear your answers. So Norma, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question or questions.
Okay, basically, I'm just wondering if I should be dealing directly with my hauler who has told me there's going to be a price increase, or should I just watch for something from DEP on what they've agreed upon for the price increase?
Great question, Norma. I think once the strategic sourcing team and the operational services division has approved these price increases, I will send an email with the price table and the link so you can see the updated price increases, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you very much.
And Claire had asked if how many had actually made price increases, and Will responded all of them. And then Kathy put in the chat the link to the FAC 110 for you to look at and Andrew Petty from Marblehead wants to know, how do we find more HHW vendors as there are not enough to meet demand? Does anyone want to or able to respond to that one?
Like, I don't know. It's I think we have, I feel like we have a lot, we haven't, not a lot, but there's quite a lot of them in category 1 that I presented. So, and that's, I don't have the right answer for that, beside what the information we presented.
So we have a number of questions following up with this one with Will. If I almost can kind of summarize them, is a number of comments about not being able to get dates for events and companies they've worked with for years not being able to do that. And I think this is one of the main reasons we're holding this webinar on regional locations and regional facilities, is because this is becoming a problem. And this is, looking at another way to handle our hazardous waste in Massachusetts. So I'm just summarizing that. We have Julia from Wayland. It's not been able to get an HHW event in almost two years. And then Claire said this is why the SSRC is pursuing a regional facility. And some people are near Norman mentioned that they send people to NEDT in Sutton in between their events. And I think I've gotten everybody. If I have not, raise your hand and we'll get you that way.
And Brooke has her hand raised.
Okay, sorry.
I just wanted to chime in and say you're exactly right, Missy. That's why we're having this event. Thank you. And I was curious about this question myself as well. So I surveyed folks, my counterparts in surrounding states in New England and New York, to ask, hey, are you having the same problems in Connecticut and Rhode Island and New Hampshire, Vermont? And surprisingly, the answer was no, not really. So I don't know. I don't know whether my colleague James Patterson wants to weigh in. We actually did have a meeting here at DEP about this about 6 months ago, where I raised this issue, saying, wow, we just, it's a constant refrain of communities not being able to get even book events. any, intel on this. And I don't know that we had answers really to that, Jim. So
Yeah,
this
I
is
can
interesting.
add a few words. So it really is kind of an infrastructure problem with multiple factors. Currently, Clean Harbors does not have a full authority to operate the way that it did in the past, meaning they can't do truck-to-truck transfers, which added efficiency and allowed them to take in and move out more waste during a week. So it's a condition that may, should be reinstituted in their license, and they might be able to come back to their full capacity in servicing customers. But I do know that they are currently having trouble just meeting their hazardous waste generator, their bread and butter, universities, hospitals, industrial facilities. They're having a problem there. On top of that, it's harder, there's low unemployment. There are not that many people who want to sit on a truck all day to drive across the country. They've even changed how they do business so that a lot of drivers now get to do a 4 hours out drive to, some place in New York, and then they come back the same day. So the long haul truckers are harder to come by. There had been some incinerator disposal capacity shortages, both during COVID, because of COVID, and then, even after COVID, there were still some incinerator capacity problems. And, I don't know what to say. I mean, Massachusetts has 9 hazardous waste facilities, which seems like a lot. However, a lot of those are waste oil facilities. So, we have Clean Harbors, we have Triumvirate, we have, we don't count GE because they don't take commercial waste. So it's really the Clean Harbors, Safety Cleans, Triumvirate, and that's about it. So, I think that's it. There may be 1 or 2 other issues contributing, but I can't think of what they are right now. But
Jim, is the Clean Harbors restriction temporary due to the fire?
it is temporary due to the fire. Town has concerns, and we're trying to work out a solution to go forward so that they can get back that capacity.
Okay,
But they're,
thank you.
Okay, we have about 3 more minutes left for questions. David Greenbaum?
Thank you. I'm just wondering if there's communities out there that want to investigate the opportunity to bring in a regional center, is there going to be grant funding of some sort to assist communities in this? We're talking potentially millions of dollars. A community is just not going to be able to absorb that on its own. So I'm just curious what kind of assistance will be available to communities.
Yeah, Janine Bishop will be touching on that.
Thank you.
And then our last question probably will be Wendy Millar Page. Sorry, Wendy Millar Page.
Hello there, everyone. So we have had the similar situation as many of the other folks across Massachusetts with getting dates booked, getting things settled. So even with the FAC 110 price list, for one event to hold from 9 to 12, the average price is now over $5,000 for those 3 hours, which is very cost prohibitive for most of the folks like myself who have a tiny little budget at this point in time. That's a massive increase. And it's also one of the things that, we lose RDP points when we're trying to get grants and things if we don't hold them. So I think this is a larger problem across the board that needs a little bit more attention in terms of helping the municipalities come up with something. Now, do I think having a giant regional facility or maybe regionalizing some of these activities in terms of, say, by county, would that be beneficial? Absolutely. But that's not a problem that's going to be solving the situation we're all stuck in right now. And I was kind of hoping that it can be something that we could bring up and really look at a little more deeply. I had last year 2 cancellations, Clean Harbors and ACV, and I'm fingers crossed I'm gonna spend 10 grand to have 2 events. And we'll see what we get, but it's not worth it because that's that minimum price. So if I only have 25 cars show up, I'm paying staff and paying them to get a couple of buckets of paint, and I think it's something we need to reevaluate as waste providers. That was all.
Wendy, one thing that we do have in place in certain districts is we have a reciprocal agreement
Right.
between municipalities. So that would be something good to become a part of. In those arrangements, every municipality opens up their event to other municipalities in the agreement, and you can basically manage it any way that you want. You could allow them to attend the last hour, you could have them pre-register, you can decide what they pay for non-residents. So it's definitely talk to your MAC if you're interested in joining that.
Gail, could I make just one comment? I promise to be quick, in response to what Wendy's saying. There, DP, this is not officially a DEP position because I don't know if we have a position on this, but there's a bill filed. Actually, there could be more than one in the legislature to create an extended producer responsibility law requiring paint manufacturers to provide for the collection and recycling of paint. This law has passed in 5 Northeast states, including Vermont, Maine, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New York. In those states, communities place their paint products, house latex and oil-based paint and related varnishes and so forth in a container. They pick up the phone, they call Paint Care, the organization that operates it, and they say, we need a pickup. There's no charge for the pickup or for the recycling. And so we heard that, paint and paint products are anywhere from 40 to 60% of our what comes in at a hazardous waste day. If the legislature hears from municipalities that this is a priority, it's possible this law will get passed. It's been pending in the legislature for the last 5 sessions. That's 10 years. It's never gone anywhere, but this could be the year. So just want to throw that out as one of those long-term solutions.
Great, thank you, Brooke. All right, now we're going to move on to discuss our local models. First, we're going to hear from Tessa David, who will provide details on the Devon's Regional Household Hazardous Waste Facility. Tessa.
Oh, just in time. Okay, here we are. Let's see. So we just had a collection. It was well attended. There were so many people moving. And I found that when we did our one-time events that I would just miss, they'd say, but I'm moving tomorrow. I need a collection. I've been doing these for over 20 years. And I would repeatedly say that as we did it in parking lots and at the DPW. And so we got together to set up a regional collection because we're a lot of small communities. And let's see if we can share some details on what I've got here. So our site.
Tessa, just make sure you put it in correct mode. We can see your notes.
There we go. How's
Perfect.
that?
Perfect.
Okay. Yes. So we found we really needed to set up a regional site. And as I heard over and over today, I'm moving. Wow, where's everybody going? But they are moving all around and they needed to get rid of their stuff. So we, over 12 years ago, started talking and no, actually we got the site over 12 years ago. We started talking over 15 years ago and thought we would get a site, and we did. We ended up having to actually build a site, but our building meant that we would set up a site that had an impervious surface. So you see this epoxy coated surface here, which is a cement surface similar to what a gas station has. And it has grid lines in it. And we've got swales. I don't know if you can see my mouse showing here, but there's a swale on both sides of the cabinets here set up. And then we have cabinets segregated by type. And we're open 20 times a year. we're open on the first Wednesday, which is what today is. And then we'll also be open Saturday from 9 to 1. And we are open March through December. So sometimes, yes, is it challenging? It is sometimes, but we've been able to make it work. It is now only member towns. When we first started out, I allowed anybody to come to these collections. It was open to anybody, but now because the towns had to pay for the infrastructure, though they had to pay less because we did receive a generous grant from MassDEP, which was wonderful and made it possible. So we were set up understated. We just have a fence around the facility and these cabinets. Not sure what happened there. And we have to provide less if the vendor provides some of our staff, but generally we have a manager, which is myself. I have my HAZWOPER training, so I do have the 40 hours. And then once a year, I have an 8-hour refresher class that I go to. And then we have an informational greeter. We have duties assigned and the tasks are all listed out. And we collect all those items that people are anxious to get rid of. And I list them all out. I love this map. I borrowed it from somebody else. I'm not sure who this was, but maybe Newton. But anyway, one of the big key items is under what to bring in the smokestack. I ask that people contact me if an item is not listed, because we used to have chemistry sets in here, and there are all sorts of adults who have taken home their chemistry sets, and this is some serious stuff out there. So they needed to let me know ahead of time so that we can be prepared. And most of the items we're able to take, but we need to make sure we have the correct containers for that. One of the other items you notice is under what to bring, that there are fees for disposal. Part of what has made our structure work, and many of the towns stopped providing collections, was because they had no money to provide these collections. We have 14 towns now that work together. They pay for the infrastructure. It's basically like pay as you throw. They pay for the infrastructure, they pay for the staff, the facility, the site, the improvements, and then the resident just pays for how much they dispose of. So the benefits, as you know, it's a routine service. It reduces demands on town staff because they know when the collections are. The DPWs and the schools can also manage their waste more quickly and safely and cost effectively. It's easy access for those moving out because they are able to clean out because they know movers won't take hazardous waste. It's cost-saving convenience for the small businesses. It's frequent access to service, minimize health risks for the children and pets, as David mentioned. Our site strategy is that it be minimized, not attractive for vision. We have trees around the site. It's have a fence, and basically you would not know it's there. And in fact, the day of the event, one of the last things I'd do is I take the signs away. We have signs that go up to show exactly where the site is. We always have a safety meeting before each collection day. People forget. I want to make sure we know exactly where our emergency meeting spot is, where the windsock is blowing, where do we need to be situated, because it changes. We have a daily site and weekly cabinet inspections. We have an 8-foot locked fence and the cabinets are locked. It's well lit and there's video surveillance on the site. The fire chief and DEP have inspected the site. There's a fire suppression system linked to the fire station in our flammables cabinet. The environmental pollution, we have environmental and pollution general liability insurance, and we are also additionally insured by the hazardous waste collection contractor. We have procedures documented for the spills, for fire and explosion, evacuation, illness and injury, and this site is in the comprehensive emergency management plan. What we have is an intermunicipal agreement among all the towns. At the very beginning, we set it up so that you have a 2-year participation agreement. All towns have continued. And we also have a requirement that one person help set up and greet every 16 months for each of the towns. The decisions are made by an oversight committee. There's one member per town and the chair rotates on that board. The towns are invoiced annually for the support, for the infrastructure costs and for the basic fixed costs. And then the allocation of their costs is broken up and based on population and equalized property values. So that's the part of their annual operating contribution. And they did also have a one-time capital investment. Originally, we thought we had a site and we found out we had to build. So we had to have a capital investment, but they very much benefited from the grant we received from DEP. The host is responsible for maintaining the site, which happens to be Devon's. Additional considerations are that we have a manager that directs the operations, attends all collections, and maintains the hazardous waste operators certification. There's a one-way traffic setup, and annually we have a financial audit. The volumes are reported, as Jim mentioned, to DEP, and the right to know reporting is sent through tier 2 reporting, which goes to the state and the fire departments and is part of the statewide collection. So some decisions you may want to make are what kind of items you want to collect, the vendors, what dates, the location, the budget, any donations, user fees, operation fees, layout, and staff. We felt that a very successful component of our operation that we included MassDEP regional offices who were the regulatory and had to give a sign off on that on our development team. And then we also included Boston staff on our team. They were invaluable. That was part of, I believe, maybe the MAC grant time. We are indebted to the time that we were able to receive from Carol and Dan, MassDEP MAC. And then also included key potential vendors on the team, so that every step of the way we got input so that we did not have any surprises at the end. We have now a secure permanent site, and the towns receive significant economies of scale. These are some of the steps where promotion is very important, as you know. Promote that, also to ensure the program's success, promote it various ways. We've used everything because everybody does not use the same way to get information. Some like the yard signs, some prefer social media, some people look at the website, some people have benefited through presentations. As you probably well know, when you don't need it, you don't hear about it or see it. But when you need it, you're looking around for it. And but you look at different avenues. It's also very important to commit to reliable staff. It doesn't happen often. It's not very frequent or a lot of time, but it's very important to have a team that's committed there at the time to be servicing the residents, servicing the users. Communicate often to obtain reliable vendors. Encourage the active, that you have an active board member and support from them. Routine site maintenance, and then maintain staff training and certification. These are procedures that we set up and we look at just before we have collections. We hand them out to people so that they are aware of what's going to happen. We also have a receipt that shows what all we collect. We've distributed flyers to the schools. We have carbon copies of these receipts. Quite a bit of this was it's routine, but it's good to have a checklist to look back over before. So right before you do it, make sure I've got the keys to the restroom. It's key. It's very important. Get all those other necessary items, not the least of which are water and maybe some snacks. Sometimes it runs longer than you expect. And as I said, that meeting at the beginning, I always tell people, your safety is number one. We can stop our line. We do not have to proceed forward. If you see somebody who looks like they need help, make sure, or they need a break because it's very hot out, or like, make sure that they, you tell them, and I've told everybody, if somebody tells you that, you have to take a break.
Tessa,
So
we're
we
running
take a look.
over.
Okay, so this is, we have this band of who all we thought would be interested in this regional site. And Okay, as I said, a safety meeting, we have safety vests, make sure we have brakes. And duties listed out, and only the items that we have listed do we accept. We no longer have these lines. That's why we have these collections routinely. At the end of the day, take a look at what all you've received, debrief staff, vendors, users. What are the lessons we've learned? We're constantly getting other little tips to be better, to do better. I mentioned about the liability insurance. We also have a volunteer liability form, and then promote the success. We're thrilled at what we hear from the users later. This is my contact information. If you have any questions about it, again, today, it's so gratifying to see the happy people. And in fact, they're so glad to be able to responsibly take care of the material.
Great. Thank you so much, Tessa. That was a lot of information in a short amount of time. I appreciate your work with that. All right, next we're going to hear from Juanita Trabert, who is going to provide details on Newton's municipal facility. Juanita.
Just waiting. Okay, now I will share. Turn on my video. Is it good?
Perfect.
Great. I will try to be quick. So we operate a municipal site at Newton. Our site is based at our resource recovery center. So it's our main recycling center. We also have a swap shop. We also have municipal operations where we store yard waste, street sweeping, catch basin cleanings, kind of at a different section of the site. We store our residential carts and parts all in the same area. And then our household hazardous waste area was, our permanent household hazardous waste collection area was established at this same site. So I look back through some old records. I have been with the city of Newton since 2016, so I don't know much of the history on this. But I know that the application was dated 1995 and an approval letter was dated 2002. And that's when the site actually opened. And I know that it was funded through a MassDEP grant. I did not track down specific paperwork on that. And I do know that our site has an EPA ID number, as Jim had mentioned, is a requirement. So this is just kind of a layout. We have, this is the recycling center. This is kind of our municipal area, and then also going up this road over here. And then our hazardous waste facility is here. This was the proposed map. So in my next slide, you'll see it's a little bit different setup now. So this is our setup with the sheds on the right-hand side. This is a day of a collection event. So we have lines for traffic flow, and then we set up cones. And then we have just kind of this area, this area where we are collecting material from residents that drive through. So we run our events April through December, the first Saturday and the third Thursday. We do not charge our residents a fee. We bake it into our operating budget. We do require proof of residency, and since the pandemic, we have built in appointments. We were able to open during the pandemic using an appointment schedule, and then we've just kind of kept it going because it worked really well on our operations side. And it's a very simple process. We just ask residents to call City Hall, and then we use Google Sheets. It's very basic, and it prevents a lot of heavy traffic, and it allows our staff to take breaks, which is really important too. So we use in-house staffing, and our goal is to safely sort and store chemicals and all the materials that we accept. I do an annual supervisory training, RCRA DOT certification. I have done the 24-hour HAZWOPER in the past. And then we do an annual safety training for our staff, which is kind of customized and tailored to our operations. So it wouldn't meet a HAZWOPER 8-hour refresher, but I would say it takes a lot of elements from that, and then it focuses more specifically on handling of chemicals. And the incentive for our staff, so it's just in-house DPW staff. So it could be the Division of Sustainable Materials Management. It could be our streets division. It could be our utilities division. The union staff are able to sign up to volunteer to get trained, and it's an overtime opportunity on a Saturday 9 times a year. So that's kind of the incentive. And we base our staffing on our level of appointments. So we just had our first event on April 1st. We had 55 appointments. And so I worked the event and had 3 additional staff. In summertime, when it picks up a little bit more, we'll have a max of like 6 staffs total with a supervisor and 5 handlers. So we collect our flammable materials and bulk them into a large tri-wall box. Those are stored in a container. Aerosol cans are put into drums. Gasoline and kerosene are poured off into a drum so that residents can take their containers back. All other chemicals are stored and sorted into appropriate sheds and stored on shelves until the vendor comes and packages things appropriately for transport. And another perk for our staff working is that usable materials can be taken by staff, but we don't otherwise have a reuse program. Our disposal vendor comes 2 to 4 times per year. We call for a pickup when 1 or more of our sheds are full. It's typically going to be our flammables or our pesticides shed that fills up pretty quickly. The vendor packs all the materials other than what we have already packaged into those boxes and drums. And then our current vendor signs our manifests. These were our costs in 2022. So the training program ran $2,500. Our safety equipment for our staff about $500. And then disposal of what we collected was about $25,000. That does include all of the purchase of the storage boxes and drums. And I also will say it wasn't necessarily the price tag for all of what we collected in 2022 because we carried a little bit over of what we collected in 2021 into that first pickup. So it's not entirely accurate for just 1 calendar year. We served 789 cars, which I didn't run David's full efficiency calculation, but I did see that that's 2% of our households. And our peak was 2018 with 949 cars. Some benefits and challenges of our operation. Benefits, we have a lot of flexibility in our program setup. We have full control over the program. We have a lot of municipal support to run frequent events and to have that cost be baked into our operating budget annually. But we do have some challenges at our site. We have a very small and tight footprint for our site. Traffic flow is always an issue. Residents get very confused about where to go. No matter how many signs or cones or people we have, it still happens. Reaching residents to know about these events has been, I would say, challenging. We put out like a bill insert in water bills in the spring. It gets out in frequent newsletters, social media, etc. We have had years in the past where it was really a lot busier than it is now. So I don't really, maybe we've had it open long enough that a lot of folks have used it. I'm not sure. We do get illegal dumping at the front area of our site. So we have 2 attendants that run our recycling center. And so if they don't catch people, then we end up with just some chemicals that are left randomly. And so we deal with them. It's not an impossible problem to solve, but it is kind of a nuisance. We also can end up with very high volumes of material per car. So the picture on the right-hand side shows a car that came in carrying a trailer just full of bins full of chemicals. And we also receive a lot of material that is not actually hazardous waste. So we manage that as trash. Of course, why would we pay to manage it as hazardous waste? But we do end up with a lot of trash from these events too. As Brooke mentioned, I also wanted to mention the paint stewardship bill that is an opportunity for Massachusetts to handle, I would say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 60% of the material that comes into these events. For us, it's 40 to 50% of what we collect is oil-based paint, stain, shellac, etc. All of these materials would be paid for with a paint stewardship program, and there would be more collection infrastructure built with that program. In 2021, we ran a latex paint collection. So latex paint is not something we typically take in our household hazardous waste because, again, it would be silly to pay for that when it's not classified as hazardous waste and doesn't pose the same risks and problems as flammable paints. But it's a nuisance for residents. So we offer this as a service. We worked with Recolor to recycle latex paint. We collected 14 tons of latex paint in 4 hours. By the end, all the staff, we had probably 15 people working that day. We were all absolutely exhausted. And so that all would have been paid for. There would have been robust infrastructure if we had a paint program, a paint stewardship program in Massachusetts. I work with Mass Recycle and chair the Massachusetts Product Stewardship Council. And we did a survey last year that demonstrated municipalities would save at least $2 million annually with passing the paint stewardship bill.
Wow.
So that concludes what I have today. But I did put in the chat that there is a Mass Product Stewardship Council meeting on April 25th. Towns or any folks as individuals that are members of Mass Recycle can attend those meetings. We do ask that you register, and we're going to talk about the priorities for this legislative session and the actions that we're taking in order to get that bill passed.
Fabulous. Thank you, Juanita. Okay. Last but not least, David, do you have a quick question?
No, just a comment that in addition to having all that paint, half of what you collect not have to pay for disposal, it's pretty common now for Paint Care to actually pay if you reuse that locally. They'll actually give you dollars per gallon to reuse that paint locally. So it's not even disposed of, just an added bonus as far as reducing your costs.
Great, thank you. All right, and last but not least, Janine Bishop is going to talk to us about upcoming grant opportunities through MassDEP for permanent HHW facilities.
Yes, and let me get my screen situated here. And come on. Okay. So sorry. Again.
We still see all your.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, hello everyone. Again, I'm Janine Bishop. I'm the grant manager for the Sustainable Material Recovery Program.
Janine, we still see your notes.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, all right. The other screen had that. Okay. Yes, so I am the grant manager for the SMART grant program. And first, before I start, I want to thank all of our speakers today. We really, really appreciate you joining us this afternoon. I heard some great stuff. It's very exciting. So what I'll be doing today is discussing how our SMART grant program can assist municipalities with establishment of a permanent HHW facility. So there are many opportunities available for assistance. Our Recycling Dividends Program offers funding from municipalities that provide HHW services to their residents. We also allow RDP funds to be spent on management of HHW. And the last grant I will talk about, or actually, sorry, the second one I'll talk about is the Technical Assistance Grant Program. And then lastly, I'll talk about the establishment of a permanent HHW facility grant that we will be offering this spring. So I'll start with the Recycling Dividends Program. A municipality can earn points for having HHW programs in place. 2 points are earned for a permanent facility or holding an event 6 or more times a year. 1 point for 2 events per year. We also allow RDP funds to be spent on HHW management. And we've added a few things to the approved list that's posted on our RDP webpage now, including construction and maintenance of a permanent facility. Transportation and processing of HHW has been on our approved spending sheet for a couple of years. In the past, we had some restrictions on how RDP could be spent on HHW, but we've opened it now in the last couple of years to just all expenses related to managing HHW. We allow a purchase of equipment that's needed to maintain a facility. And our outreach and education component includes allowance of toxic management, and then also education on toxic reduction, which is really important. RDP funds can be spent for those types of outreach as well. So technical assistance grants, Tessa mentioned receiving technical assistance from Carol and Dan back when they were planning their facility. Our technical assistance grant, while it doesn't offer money, it allows MAC time up to 80 hours of technical assistance for program development. And again, it's provided by the Municipal Assistance Coordinator, and there is an application process on ReTrack. If you're interested in doing so, for example, if you're not prepared for this spring's grant round and you want to get ready for next year, it might be a good idea to reach out to your MAC and apply for a technical assistance grant. The last grant I will mention is our establishment of permanent household waste collection facility. And what we're doing is making funds available for establishment of a facility. It's been a few years since we've offered this grant. The last time we offered it, Calliope's project was down on the Cape, the one Dave mentioned, was approved. And we had to put that grant on hold along with a few other grants for funding reasons, but we felt this year, with all we've heard from municipalities and from the MACs, we're hearing loud and clear that events are very problematic to both schedule and for a lot of the reasons you've heard. The vendors just are not available. So we felt it was the perfect time to reintroduce this grant with the hopes to site permanent HHW facilities throughout the state over time. Can't do it overnight, but again, as you've heard, convenience is a huge factor. And residents, the move, like Tess heard how many times? Tessa heard that folks just want to get rid of this stuff when they're ready to get rid of it. And with a permanent facility, there are more opportunities for residents, and it's a huge factor. So as far as detailed information on this grant, you will hear more about that at our May 10th grant workshop. And but I can tell you, like in a nutshell here, it's open to municipalities, and municipalities acting as a lead for a group of municipalities, a regional entity. It must serve residents, can also serve small businesses. And during the evaluation process, we'll look more favorably on those who are open to small businesses and schools, institutions. The funding is for establishment of a new facility or retrofitting an existing facility, and the grant amount is up to $50,000 for a municipal facility, or up to $250,000 for a regional or multi-municipality project, and it'll depend on population served and whether access is granted to other entities. The grant will include staff training for costs, and I guess that's it in a nutshell. More detail will follow at our grant workshop on May 10th. The SMRP webpage has been updated to include the details on this grant, so that is available now. Hoping somebody out there, one of our staff members, can put a link to the SMRP webpage in the chat. And we'll be sure to include that when we share the presentations as well. And my last slide are the presenters. And again, this will be shared with all at a later date. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Janine. So we have about 5 minutes left for questions. And be sure to reach out to your Max if you're interested in a municipal or regional model. We definitely are here to help you. All right, Missy, there are questions that came in?
No, actually, they've been answered. So we have nothing coming in on the chat, and I don't see anyone with their hand raised.
Okay, Janine, can you stop sharing?
Sorry.
That's okay. And we can see more people, see if there are hands up.
David still has David has his hand up. I don't know if it was left up or. Oh, okay.
Stop share.
Perfect. All right. No other questions? Everybody did that good of a job explaining everything. See, isn't that amazing? Well, I want to thank everybody, all of our speakers, David, James, Tessa, Juanita, Will, and Janine. Appreciate all the hard work you put into this presentation. And again, we will have this posted on our webpage. Not sure when, probably within a week or so. And we hope to hear from you about establishing some permanent HHW sites. Thank you so much for attending. Have a great day, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm just going to remove everybody else. Is that okay? Oh, I think I might have accidentally reported them to Zoom, not realizing it. Oops. Julia, you're muted.
Sorry. Oh, that's so funny because so you guys didn't even hear me when I said let's
No.
stay on. Oh, that's so
What did you
crazy.
say?
I said, hey, if the team can stay on,
Oh, no,
that'd be
didn't hear it.
great. And then I said, oh, wow, it looks like we're the team, nobody else, you know.
You should stop
I was
recording
kind
though.
of, I could read part of your lips, so I'm like, I think she wants to stay on.
Yeah.
I thought it went well. I mean,
Yeah.
Do we stop recording, Julia?
yeah. I did that once.